This is Mark Matlock, and I've got my guest, Dan Siegel, on today. And Dan, you've written a book, Brainstorm, helping understand the teenage brain and how to maximize this time of their life.
Yep.
You've been somebody who's been involved in the field of relational psychology and psychiatry for a long time. What led you to want to write a book about the teenage brain?
Well, what led me to want to write a book about it, Mark, is the experience of raising two teenagers who are now past their teens. One's 20 and one's 24. And I guess my wife and I wanted to figure out, what in the world did we just go through? And how could we actually make sense of it? And when I looked to what was available to parents, there was basically nothing that really explored these new findings about changes in adolescence that have to do with changes in the adolescent brain. And when I looked to what was available for the adolescent himself or herself to read about this subject, there was absolutely nothing. So then I thought, well, what if there was a book that both an adolescent could read and an adult could read, so they could actually share a common ground of understanding about this new science? And there's nothing actually out there for both to read. So I thought, well, okay, that's a challenge. I'd written some other books for the general public, for scientists, for parents, and I thought, I'll try this out. And what was really motivating me was to find that what was available was really misleading, sometimes out and out wrong. And what I wanted to do is bust those myths, make the truths known. And the good news is, when you realize the truths, then there's positive things you can do with your life, and whether you're an adolescent or an adult. And so that's what led to the book being written.
Well, I know that a lot of the people that you Specialties is connected with were youth workers working in usually church or faith-based settings, trying to help teenagers navigate this time of their life. We're coming alongside parents. We probably hold on to a lot of the myth-busting that you discovered in your journey, but I'd be curious, since you're probably more of an expert than any of us would be in this area, what are some of the myths that you uncovered as you were exploring the subject?
Well, what's really fun, since the book came out very recently, was to actually go to middle schools and high schools, to speak to the students themselves, to speak to parents and speak to teachers and therapists, anyone who is involved in the adolescent period of life, and ask them about these myths. Like, here's one myth, for example. Like, how many people have heard that raging hormones are driving adolescents to behave the way they do? And everyone pretty much raises their hand. And in fact, that's false. It's a myth. And the problem with it being false is that people believe it. And if you believe it, if you had raging hormones, Mark, what would we do? We would filter your blood and get rid of those hormones that are raging and give them anger management lessons or something. What would you do with a raging hormone? There's nothing you can do with a raging hormone. So it's not only misleading, but it's disempowering. The truth is, the changes in the way adolescents behave, the way they feel, and the way they think, the three basic huge changes that do happen in adolescence, they're correlated with changes in the structure of the brain. And when you learn about these changes in the brain, which is what I teach in the Brainstorm book, you as an adolescent actually can be empowered to use your mind to actually optimize the way your brain is remodeling itself during this period. So it's not raging hormones, it's remodeling brain. It's not disempowerment where you're helpless, but actually empowerment where there's something you can do with the proper kind of knowledge. So that's what I offer in the book, is the knowledge of the science, bust that myth among other myths, and then give the skills that you can learn to actually optimize your life as an adolescent.
So what are some of those unique opportunities or leverage points that you see in the unique space of teenage brain development that we can leverage?
Yeah. Well, I try to remember the remodeling adolescent brain's major features with an acronym, which is a word where the letters stand for the thing you want to get across. And
we love acronyms. We love acronyms. So.
Oh, you do? I love them too. Some people don't like them, and then they get irritated with you as an author of a book when you put acronyms in. But this one, I haven't found anyone who's not liked it. And, I was looking at all the research on the adolescent brain changes, summarizing it all in my own mind in my notes. And what jumped out from all the different research that's come out really just over the last dozen or so years is the finding that if you clustered the major research established views on the adolescent brain, there are 4 things that are at the top of the list of what the adolescent brain remodeling does. And they spell the word essence. So let's start with the first 2 letters, ES, of essence. ES stands for emotional spark. So if you take your hand and put your thumb in the middle and put your fingers over the top, this is a pretty, my daughter says don't say this, but a handy model of the brain. And it's oriented like this in your head. Okay. You got one here over my shoulder like that. That would be like this one there. That's the same shape. But in this model shows you that you got a higher part of the brain where you do your thinking and decision making. You got lower parts of the brain where you're taking stuff from the body through your spinal cord. It's interacting with the lower brainstem and the limbic area in the middle. All this stuff from the body, the brainstem, the limbic area is below the highest part called the cortex. The reason I say all that is an adolescent has more emotion from these lower areas, body, brainstem, limbic area, that push upward on the cortex and influence how you think and reason. So the way we summarize that with the essence word is ES, emotional spark. There's a purpose to it, which is basically to mobilize the adolescent to get ready to leave home. There's a downside, which is you can feel irritable and moody more than when you're a kid and more than when you're an adult. But there's an upside, which is life is full of passion and vitality. Emotions give meaning to life. So rather than running from these intense emotions or calling them raging hormones or something like that, when you understand the changes in the interaction of these elements of the brain and the remodeling, this emotional spark can be optimized so that instead of avoiding the surf, you learn to surf the waves. This is a power that's full of passion and purpose. And what we want to do is give adolescents the respect that they deserve and to harness the important vitality that comes out of that emotional spark. So that's the first one, ES. The next change that happens in the brain happens in the limbic area, where it's a social aspect of the brain. And SE stands for social engagement. The adolescent brain is, over millions of years of history, is really having us be very social. We want to connect with other members of our adolescent group. So membership can feel like a matter of life and death because, in fact, being associated with another peer, another adolescent who's going to go out in the world and leave home with you is going to help you survive. Now, the reason for it is you're getting ready to leave home, so you can't just rely on your parents. You've got to get ready to have relationships with others. That's the social engagement piece. The downside is this membership can feel so compelling. Oh my God, I got to wear those boots and fit in with the other people. I got to go to that party. And then your parent says, no, I'm not going to buy those boots for you. No, I'm not going to let you go to the party. Well, whether you buy the boots or not, or go to the party or not, an adult needs to understand that this can feel like a matter of life and death. So the social engagement, the downside of it, it can make you feel desperate. It can make you feel really, really upset if you're not a member of a group. And it can have you give up morality for membership. And that we call, in the simple term, peer pressure. So while peer relationships are important, if you give up your values to be a member of a group that doesn't have the values you have, well, that's not so good. So what we want to do is give kids at any age, but especially adolescents, an internal compass so they can be true to themselves and understand when they're longing for belonging in a group is sacrificing their values, and they can steer clear of that group and find another group that shares their values. That's a positive approach to social engagement. So that's SE. We have emotional spark, ES, social engagement, SE. What's the N? The N of essence is novelty. There's a system in this brain that goes from the deep brainstem up past the limbic area and up to the cortex where you make decisions. that's called the reward circuit of the brain. And the way the brain works is you got basic cells called neurons, and they communicate with each other by releasing a chemical called a neurotransmitter. And there's dozens and dozens of them. One neurotransmitter that's especially important for adolescents and is crucial for this reward circuit, a circuit that lets you feel like what you did was meaningful and rewarding, that neurotransmitter is called dopamine. Now, dopamine changes in profound ways when puberty hits, roughly the beginning of adolescence. This change in the reward system of the brain basically is equivalent to dropping the baseline levels of dopamine and raising the release levels. What does that mean and why does it happen? The reason for it is the major experience that activates dopamine is novelty. So by pushing you to have a lower dopamine level, you're kind of restless. By raising the release levels, you really want to get that dopamine release because it feels so good when it does. Novelty is one of the major things that releases it. Leaving home is leaving the certainty of the home, the familiarity of the home, the comfort of the home, for the potential and the safety of the home. And now your dopamine reward system changes, drives you to go toward the unfamiliar, the uncertain, and potentially uncomfortable and potentially unsafe. This is what the dopamine change does. So that's the reason for it, so it gets you out of the house. The downside, of course, is risk-taking behavior. Another downside that is really kind of very sad is addiction. All addictive activities or substances like alcohol or heroin or cocaine, they all entrap the dopamine system, if you will, and grab it and make it so you would do that thing or take that substance or be involved in the activities around that substance more than anything else because it's the best release of your dopamine. So that's why if you're going to get addicted to something, it's most likely to happen when you're an adolescent because of this dopamine change. It's not raging hormones. It is this fundamental change in the dopamine system. So that's N, the novelty. Another reason, just to make sure we say it, that you're able to do a lot of risky things as an adolescent. So even though your body is stronger and healthier than any other time of life, you are 3 times more likely to have an avoidable injury or death because of something you did or some other adolescent did. That's really scary. So adults who go, whoa, I'm nervous. Yeah, it's understandable we're nervous. It's a dangerous time of life because of avoidable things. Now, the thing that allows risk to happen besides the dopamine drive for novelty and risk-taking is something called hyper-rational thinking. And hyper-rational thinking, you can think of it as rationalizing. So if I get a brand new car, and you're my dad, Mark, you give me a brand new car. Hey, the speedometer on this car goes to 120 miles per hour. And there's a street down the road. I'll bet I could crank this baby up to 110. Whoa, yeah. Now, the downside of that is I could get killed. I could destroy the car. I could kill somebody. Hyper-rational thinking makes it so I minimize the significance of those new things I'm very well aware of, but I just don't care about them. And I'm rationalizing, yeah, but it'd be so cool to do the 110 mile an hour thing with Dad. He's giving me this car and it goes to 120. Why not take it to 110? It's not 120, so I'm keeping it low. I'll go to 110. You know, and so that's like rationalization. So the scientists call it hyper-rational thinking. We don't think it's reasonable, but it's hyper-rational, right? Because I'm de-emphasizing the negative, overemphasizing the positive. So between the hyper-rational thinking and the dopamine shifts, we explain why adolescent risk-taking is not just about impulsivity, which it is in the beginning, and that's another myth. Oh, adolescents either are just impulsive, which is not true. You can plan out going 110 miles an hour. Or they're just plain not informed. That's not true either. Studies are really clear. They know about the dangers. They just don't care about them. So we want to develop, again, this internal compass, which I do in these mindset skills, that allow you to build the positive side of the essence because, in fact, it's good to be able to go out in the world and try something you're not familiar with. Try something new. That's the N, novelty. The last part of the essence is CE, creative exploration. You know, the brain of an adolescent is kind of built to challenge the status quo. And you know as a parent, as I do too with adolescents, your kids are going to challenge you in subtle ways or severe ways. But they're going to challenge you. Now, their brain is designed to do that. So parents who read the Brainstorm book, they go, oh my God, now I understand there's a purpose to this behavior. They're not just being rude. There's actually a purpose. And in fact, it's for the individual, of course, to say, hey, when I was a child, I just soaked in knowledge like a sponge, but I'm not a child anymore. I'm an adolescent. My job is to challenge what you hand me, to not assume it's accurate, to roll my eyes and think, oh, whatever, like that. When parents take it personally and they fight back, of course, it starts all these conflicts. That's really unnecessary. So the space that this understanding gives an adult is huge. The space that it gives an adolescent to understand, okay, that's just what my brain is doing. Now, that's the reason for it. What's the downside to it? It can feel really disheartening to go from being a child where you see your parents as, heroes and heroines, and you go, whoa, they're just people. And then to go from saying the world is this wonderful, safe, great place that I'm being handed, and then as an adolescent go, well, hold on now. This world is in serious trouble. Who handed me this? Mm-hmm. I'm really kind of mad at the adults who, number one, told me the world was fine, or at least that's how I heard it, and number two, they created this world, so to speak, and I'm mad at them. So, of course, it doesn't feel so good to get disillusioned, and get disillusioned not only with the world, but with your parents, the people who love you more than anybody. So it's a hard thing. That's the downside. What's the upside of creative exploration? For the individual, it's exciting to actually not be constrained by what you're given and try to see a whole new world. And for our human family, think about this. The major innovations in music, in art, in science, and in technology all come from adolescent minds primarily. So that's a huge thing. And if you think about it this way, when we get to be adults, we get to be kind of tired. We find our own niche. We want to just go home and watch some TV and relax and oh my God. But the world is forever changing. Mm-hmm. So we as a human family need some group of individuals. And I want to suggest to you those individuals are adolescents who are ready to take on an ever-changing world and really try to make it a better place. So I think this creative exploration, challenging your mind and pushing the boundaries of known things, known ways of doing things, known knowledge, is an incredible source of courage and creativity on our planet that we're not tapping into. And I think we have an opportunity to change the cultural conversation around adolescents, empower them, bust the myths. It's not raging hormones. It's remodeling the brain. It's not impulsivity. It's changing the dopamine reward system and hyper-rational thinking. It's not just a period of life you have to just rush through and get over. Actually, the essence of adolescence that we just reviewed, emotional spark with passion, social engagement, connecting to others, novelty, and creative explorations, not only is that the essence of adolescence, yes, and we can cultivate it well, fine, but adults need to know that when you review the research of all the studies of how our brains stay young and vital as we age, and you're going to pick the top 4 things for us to do as adults, it would be keep passion in your life, emotional spark, be socially engaged, have relationships that are supportive, try new things, novelty, and challenge your mind, creative explorations. The essence of adolescence is the essence of living a vital life across a lifespan.
Well, one of the things that I know in the church we talk about a lot is how the church as a social institution isn't necessarily growing, changing, moving forward. And I think a lot of it's because teenagers are marginalized in that community as well as they are in most communities rather than being invited in for that creative exploration, to kind of help challenge that. And with the youth workers that we're working with, they are advocates for teenagers. They believe teenagers, they're going to absorb this message that you're sharing here because they believe that teenagers can change the world. They see it happen. They're trying to empower them to do it. And I'm curious because you talk about parents, and a lot of us are coming alongside. We're kind of a third parent or
like a mentor
or a mentor or a friend. How do we deal with the fact that you so much of what you do is attachment based psychology and whatnot. How do we help teenagers that are having a hard time connecting socially or fitting into the world around them. How does that affect their brain, and how do we as youth workers come alongside them in that?
You know, there's a lot of reason to believe that mentors, non-parental adult figures that are trustworthy, can be an incredibly vital source of support, that adolescents should not be completely left in isolation from adults. And yet there's a natural and understandable push away from parent figures. Mm-hmm. Now, we have teachers, but they're usually overwhelmed and busy. We have athletic coaches that, you know, are doing stuff with the sports team. We need to figure out something, and it's in religious organizations, that's beautiful. If it's in for other organizations, that would be beautiful too. Some mentor program where there's an adult figure who knows about adolescent development, who can play a role of a trustworthy, not someone who's going to hurt you. This is really crucial. A trustworthy adult that the adolescent can bring into their life trustingly, that an adult can feel good about this adult being in their life, and that everything is clear, you know, but it's a separate kind of relationship from what goes on between the adolescent and the parent. We need to be creative in how to do it, and you maybe can lead the way in thinking, you know, mentors, just to use that word, are essential for an adolescent to move their way, not just in their peer group with social engagement, but social engagement with mentors, where they're really helping someone who knows who they are individually, who can help them see the path that they're on, not just rushing to become an adult, but the path of adolescence is itself a wonderful time of transformation if you understand how to optimize your essence.